By 1185, the Second Plague was extinguished before it reached Europe, and millions were saved because it killed too fast for its own good. In 1187, unable to marry due to her condition, Kaiserine Alice, who had earned the title Fearless at this point for her bold demeanor, decided to adopt a boy by the name of Erhard as the heir to the Volksreich. In 1187, the new Patriarch Sudislav called the Sixth Albigensian Crusade upon the Khanate of Ayabir to the east. The Volksreich did not bother to answer their rallying cry at this time. Also in the east, the Kingdom of Moskva had stolen the name of Kiev, conquered most of its territory, and began to unite many of the shattered Slavic peoples west of the domineering Yakids. This was much to the chagrin of the former ruling power in the east, Novgorod, now duly challenged. On this particular note, Albigensian Kiev would heretofore be referred to as Lesser Kiev. On the 28th of February 1190, Kaiserine Alice died suddenly of severe stress at the age of 39, leaving her 8-year-old adoptive son Erhard upon the throne. To the east, in March of 1190, the Archegos of the Manichaeans declared the first great purification upon the Sunni Rustamids, declaring Muhammad the mouthpiece of Lucifer. This sent shockwaves across the known world, as the Ayikids were on the cusp of becoming one of the largest powers in Europe. By June, Lesser Kiev won the crusade against the Manichaean Ayabir, who were far weaker than their Yakid brothers to the east. As this proved Lesser Kiev would not be going anywhere, the world was nonetheless stuck with two Kievs in the east. By July, Greater Kiev converted to Catholicism, leaving a Catholic and Albigensian Kiev to contend with each other. This made the effort of renaming rather easy, as Greater Kiev simply wanted to be the only Kiev, and Lesser Kiev did not want to be referred to as lesser by the known world. As such, the Albigensian Kingdom of Lesser Kiev would be referred to as Holy Kiev in order to differentiate between the two. They made this decision without regards to their chroniclers' aching heads. Another anomalous development in December of 1191 was that the Apostolic Christians of Hereti established the Knights of St. Blaise in order to better defend their realm from those assailing them on all sides. The Order of St. Blaise was known for its mountain warfare and was exceedingly skilled for the shrinkingly small amount of faithful they had to protect. In 1192, Pannonia was steadily gaining power by consuming the ruined Greek kingdoms left behind by Byzantium's second collapse. The Pannonians were becoming well known for their domineering nature as rulers under the terrible crown of their lord Istvan van Kura. Their despotic abuse of new conquests was famously heralded as nothing more than a never-ending raid. Their Greek subjects often felt slaughtered where they stood, whole villages laid low and their families carted off in droves to slave markets in the Mediterranean, that it would indeed be better to be dead than to live under their thumb. There was one Greek realm which stood in powerful opposition, however. This was the Kingdom of Thessaloniki, led by the former Basilius of the Byzantines, Antonios Doxopatres, and with a reconquered Constantinople as their capital, they defended against the Muslim Kingdom of Lakandu to the east and the rising Catholic power of Pannonia in the west. Truly a test of will those last inheritors of the Romans had to endure. By 1194, the first great purification was complete, leaving rivers of blood draining into the Aral Sea, and the Manichaean faith triumphant in the east. In 1198, Kaiser Erhard got the recent excommunication of the crown lifted, because the dismay of the more traditional nobles at an uncrowned Kaiser was becoming too much, and the Albigensian Church was sorely missing their support. Kaiser Erhard held an imperial coronation and then set off to weed out corruption from within the Volksreich, a unique endeavor for a monarch. In the east, Dekoya Pol emerged as another Albigensian power in the east out of Holy Kiev, due in part to ethnic differences between the two. The year 1200 looked indeed far different than the year 1100, more different than any could have anticipated a century ago. The Volksreich was the rock of Europe indeed, resolutely stable and to some degree unchallenged, though this would not be the case for long. Empires were forming around the world which rivaled its power, some on the cusp and some already established. They capitalized on that same chaos in order to become powerful themselves. Pannonia was coalescing into a power not to be trifled with, known for its brutality. The Aequid, with their strange and fanatical cult, tyrannized Eastern Europe with their thousands upon thousands of savage horsemen, a force not seen in Europe since the Huns. The Fatimids still posed a threat, and meddled in the affairs of Europe by directly aiding in the recovery of Lacandu, now challenging Thessaloniki from the east. The Seljuks were growing ever more difficult to contain, but the entirety of the Middle East hoped that, pressed between two great empires, their flame would not manage to engulf the world. Chaos still reigned in other places, but the struggle to control them was clearly visible. Aquitania was the most likely winner in the Gallic region, while the Yusufian had edged the Catholics out of Iberia. The British Isles were once again in chaos, domineered over by foreign powers like Novgorod and the Volksreich, though Bianforta, ruling out of Cornwall, was proving to be a formidable force there. In Africa, the Ptolemy Sultanate finally collapsed, their power vacuum filled for the most part by the Agetigid. Finally, Eastern Europe's chaos spilled into Scandinavia, with the two Kievs and Novgorod struggling to gain hegemony over the region before the Aequid decided to turn their sights west. Throughout the first 5 years of the 1200s, Kaiser Erhard enacted his reforms with an iron fist, crushing who he had to underfoot. This also meant that he was spending his father's vast fortune at an incredible rate, being reduced to around half by 1203. He even restored the People's Army, sworn to him. On the 10th of January 1206, King Manarid Vancouver declared himself the first emperor of the Magyarország, ushering in a new power to rival even the Volksreich. Kaiser Erhard would seek to establish friendly relations concerning the immense power between the two empires. By August of that year, the once great Novgorod was conquered by Vepsanma, a heavy blow to the Catholic world. In 1210, the useful but expensive 14,000-man People's Army needed to be disbanded upon reaching a particular deficit in the treasury. In 1211, Kaiser Erhard contracted slow fever, and so, fearing death, he adopted a young boy from Schwarzburg whose parents died of the plague by the name of Apo. In the east, the Seljuks collapsed under pressure from the Aequids, who had decided to direct their army of light southwards. By July, Kaiser Erhard had recovered from his illness. In 1212, Apo contracted slow fever. By May of that year, rumors reached the court of the Volksreich once more, tales of a Khan far to the east, beyond Volkish maps, who wished to see all the clans of the Great Steppe united. They called him Temujin and his 60,000-man horde, all atop horseback. No sooner had the news reached the ears of the Kaiser than the great Khan Temujin himself set his great horde upon the legendary Aequid Khaganate. History saw those Uyghur Manichaeans and their unstoppable army of light defend against the thundering hooves of the Tengri Mongols and their terrifying horde. Evenly matched, surely many tens of thousands would die. At their first battle, the Battle of the Wastes, the Mongols would win the day, entering into Europe. By 1216, with Basileus Antonios dead, and no proper heir to succeed the throne of Thessaloniki, the Bulgarian minority seized their chance, took the throne, and established the Kingdom of Bulgaria in its stead to oppose the Magyars. Their king, Dragomir Georgiev, was firmly unkind to his Greeks, and though he lacked the administrative genius which made his predecessor great, he held a conviction for the Orthodox Church that was at least twice as strong, and his most fiery motivator to resist the encroaching powers. Later that year, due to his bold defense of the Volksreich from a sizable pagan rebel force in the south, Kaiser Erhard earned the title of the Fearless. In 1217, the Greeks that languished under Bulgarian rule revolted, and Thessaloniki rose up again under Argus Xiphias. During this chaos, the Magyarország conquered the scattered northern provinces with ease, doubling in size practically overnight. On the 3rd of March, interrupting Pau's Day celebrations, the insane Gisela the Terrible declared a revolt league to lower the authority of the crown by force. Kaiser Erhard the Fearless refused out of principle and to preserve his reforms. The grueling civil war led to 20,000 dead and the mad Gisela on the end of a pike at the close of the year. Kaiser Erhard had asserted that the crown is the one that speaks and its vassals listen. Kaiser Erhard became a cruel man at the end of that war. In May of 1221, to the west, in the shattered French kingdoms, Aquitania rose to the rank of empire under Emperor Hoel the Shrewd. He then led the charge into Spain, leading the first Christian victories there in over 200 years. Emperor Hoel would call this new endeavor La Reconquête. In 1227, Tanist Apo got married at the age of 21. In 1229, having reached an agreement with the Mongols after the natural death of their fearsome leader Temujin, the Archegos of the Aequids declared a great purification for Novgorod, invading Vepsanma to carve out this kingdom. The Archegos Tangri famously said this as he called upon his mounted throngs, "The Magi will cleanse all churches in healing flame." In 1230, to the south, the kingdom of Sicily became the Empire of Africa, beneath Imperatore Pulianello Morone. In 1231, a son was born to Tanist Apo named Erhard II. In 1233, Lakandu was able to call itself an empire, establishing the Second Empire of Lakandu, thus making them a renewed threat. By May of 1234, with the skull of one of his rivals dug up from their grave on his mantle, Kaiser Erhard became vicious in his old age, exhibiting sporadic outbursts of anger or physical violence against those nearby. There were several instances where servants were killed by him in fits of rage. In 1235, the Great Purification for Novgorod failed, the first one to do so. Perhaps it marked that the Great Army of Light had finally run out of momentum. On the 13th of July, 1235, Kaiser Erhard died at the age of 53 due to severe stress. A wroth man in the end, many feared to cross him or even bring bad news. Kaiser Apo rose to the throne at the age of 29 with an heir by the name of Erhard II. In the east, by 1236, the Mongols were invigorated by a new bloodlust, exploding into the Middle East to conquer for their new Khan, who united all the clans, Jochi, who they now called the greatest among them, Genghis Khan. In 1237, King Alfwald of Lombardia declared war upon the Volksreich. In June of 1238, Apo, struggling with his father's many debts, lost the war to Lombardia, which took the provinces of Treviso, cutting off Rome from the rest of the Volksreich. Later that month, a second son was born to Apo named Apo II. By 1242, the Mongols had broken through to the Indian Ocean, slicing the great and ancient Fatimid Empire in half. It seemed that their fabled stability didn't mean much when it came time to defend itself. On the 18th of December 1250, a man called Brother Angelo criticized Pope Benedictus X. He accused the Pope of violating holy doctrine and declared that any who follow him or his decrees had lost the grace of God. Meanwhile, by 1253, rumors of a third plague began to rock the court, and the fact that the rumors were coming from Sicily meant that it was much closer to home than the last one. In 1258, Patriarch Bonifacius declared a crusade against the Aequids, who had been weakened greatly by the Mongols, adopting the name of Khorasan. Kaiser Apo the Brave had no interest. By around 1262, the manifold peoples and languages of the Volksreich began to consolidate, and the former prominent culture, Frankisk, began to be replaced by High German, along with a more centralized language, also High German. Meanwhile, the crusade against the Aequids failed without any other backers. In 1264, as a result of illness, Kaiser Apo the Brave, called so for his confidence in hopeless situations, had to have his left hand amputated. On the 2nd of August, 1265, Kaiser Apo died of that infected wound at the age of 59. A patient and humble man, he would be remembered fondly. Kaiser Erhard II, called the Holy of the Volksreich, rose to the throne at the age of 34. Blessed with awesome knowledge, his rule was destined to be legendary. He had an heir and a son by the name of Karl.